Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle. I'm your host, Marianne, and today we're continuing to explore what it means to age well, not just to get older, but to grow into ourselves more fully, with clarity, joy, and purpose in a way that sets us up to make our third act the most vibrant one yet. My guest is Erika Andersen, and she's someone who's spent her entire career helping people do just that. As the founding partner of Forties, a coaching and consulting firm, Erika has spent over 30 years guiding senior leaders at companies like Spotify, Amazon, and Charter. She's the best-selling author of books like Be Bad First, Leading So People Will Follow, and Change from the Inside Out. And her practical but soulful insights have been featured in Harvard Business Review, Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, and New York Times. Now in her 70s, Erika's turning that lens inward toward the experience of aging. In her newest book, The New Old, Crafting Your Best Later Life, she offers a new framework for how we think about what she calls the third act of life and how we can shape it with intention, courage, and creativity. Erika, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. What a wonderful introduction. I may just, bring you around with me.
You're not the first one to say that, and I'm always available to do something like that. So you just let me know. Give me a call. I guess the first question, maybe the most obvious question, is how do you define the third act of life? What is that for you?
Oh, that's a wonderful setup. And that also has to do with why I called the book The New Old, because one thing that's true is that human beings until this century and this generation, have mostly not gotten old.
Yeah.
Most people died, right? There are two wonderful statistics I'll share with you. One is that 100 years ago in the world, 1 in 20 people was over 65. And now 1 in 6 people is over 65. Being over 65 100 years ago was uncommon. 1 in 20 people, 5 out of 100. Now 1 in every 6 people. So it's just completely different than it's ever been.
I love that statistic.
And the other one that you will love even more is a reasonably healthy 65-year-old person who doesn't smoke today has about even odds of living to be 90. So that means if you're 65, you got about a 50% chance living to be 90. That has never happened in the history of mankind. So it's the new old. And that leads us into the third act part, because all up until now, human life has been kind of 2 chapters and an epilogue. The first chapter is you grow up, right? The second chapter is you're an adult. And then there's this whole epilogue where you're just increasingly frail and weak and you hang around for a couple of years and die, right?
Yes.
Now that's a whole third act. It's a whole third chapter. Most people who retire at 65, if they're in pretty good health, have 2 or 3 decades.
Love that.
We're not used to thinking of it like that, and society kind of hasn't caught up with that reality. I mean, you know this better than anybody, that for most people, being over 60 or over 65, it's kind of like you're going off road. You don't even have a GPS. It's like, what is it supposed to be like? So you have to get clear about it for yourself. What kind of an older person do you want to be? And what kind of a later life, a third act, do you want to have?
I love conversations like this because, so my friend Andy Lyons does a podcast called Don't Be Caged by Your Age. Right. And she brings a bunch of folks, older than 65, maybe in their 60s and up. And they're not like celebrities. They're what I'm going to call regular, and I'm using air quotes, regular people who now can model how vibrant that third chapter can be. And I don't think for many of us, and I'm 56, we had a model that showed us what that could look like. I think if we're being honest, for most of us, late 60s, 70s, really beyond retirement, that seemed old. And I'm saying old, but what did that look like? We just didn't have models of that vibrancy and that thought that we could go on and do whatever we want to do, really,
Exactly.
at that point. So I just love this kind of work. And I love the work Andy's doing because it's time we start changing that model and that dialogue and make people know that it can be different.
Yeah, exactly. And as with most things, I mean, hopefully society will catch up, but you can change from the inside. One of the things that we've learned, I think, over the years is that when society has a negative premise, a negative model about something, we internalize that. Like I was just talking to a friend of mine who's 80 and so vibrant and full of life. And she was saying, I realize that I've internalized society's ageism.
Mm.
And she said, I don't like old people. And she said it really keeps me from having great relationships with other old people. She said, I realize I'm old, I'm 80, but I don't like old people. And I laughed and I said, yeah, so we have to untake that out of our brains, which is quite a bit of what I talk about in the book.
Absolutely. We have to change that. Speaking of change, when I look at your trajectory of your career, I mean, you were a change agent your entire life, but you also somewhat uniquely were good at what I'll call good at changing yourself. And that's not common with everybody. So I'm curious if you know what set you up for that. Do you think you were just born with that ability? Do you think something prompted you to be okay being, comfortable being uncomfortable? Something I talk about all the time.
That is a marvelous, marvelous question, and I'll talk later about how it shows up in the book. But for me personally, I think there are, and I've thought about this a lot. I think there are three things that really helped me be okay with change. And the first one was that my dad, who I just adored, was probably the most curious person I've ever known. He just was fascinated about why things were the way they were, why people reacted the way they did. Why, I mean, we would be on vacation and we'd go into a restaurant in some small town in South Dakota. And he'd be like, with the waitress, he'd be like, hi, do you work here full time? And she'd say, well, no, I just work here part time, to make some extra money for our farm. Oh, you guys have a farm. Tell me about that. Has your family farm for? And he was absolutely sincere, and people could feel his sincerity. So, the waitress would just come back over to our table whenever she could, so my dad could ask her more questions. And that was such a power. You talked earlier about models. That was such a powerful model for me. And I think curiosity as a trait has so many wonderful attributes. One is that it's just turbocharged fuel for learning,
Yeah.
but also that it makes change less scary because when you're curious, you're like leaning into stuff you don't know, stuff you don't understand. So that was an incredibly powerful and positive change support for me as a kid. The second thing was that I'm left-handed.
Hmm.
And when you're left-handed in a right-handed world, you have to make up stuff all the time. I remember being 6 years old in first grade, and the scissors were right-handed scissors. They hurt my hand. So I had to turn them over and cut weird. I had to make them work. So I think being left-handed in a right-handed world it's like if you're not quite regular, then you have to get better at change, I think. So that's thing two. And then thing three was I have always my mom used to tell me this was true from when I was a little kid. I always wanted to crack codes. I always wanted to figure out how things worked and how to make them easier. Every book I've written is cracking a code. How do you manage people? How do you lead? How do you go through change? Ironically, given our conversation, how do you learn better? And now with this new book, how do you get old well? And I think wanting to solve problems like that, that's another thing like curiosity that just leans you into change. So I think those are the main things that have set me up to be somebody who generally likes change and leans into it. But the good thing about that is when I'm one of the things that's true about me is when I notice that I'm pretty good at something, that other people find difficult, I really try to take it apart so that I can help other people. Like, what do I do, and what do other people who are good at going through change do, so that I can teach it, so that I can help people be better at it.
Connect the dots and make it consumable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to a lot of what you said. So let's dig in a little bit. When you think about this third act and creating it in a way that's intentional and
Yes.
vibrant and fulfilling,
Yes.
what does that look like? Give us a few of the key principles that you want to highlight and that people can sort of take away to start just thinking about, just to get interested in sort of how to set this up.
Oh, that's a great setup. And just a little more sentence or two of more context before I go there. So when I started thinking about this, and I realized that the code I wanted to crack was how to get old well, how to, as you say, create a great, joyful, purposeful third act. I thought I really started to research, as I always do, and read a bunch of books. And baby boomers are writing books about aging with a vengeance these days. There's a billion of them out there. And I noticed that most of them were pretty granular and specific and tactical, what to eat, how to save your money,
Mm,
how to exercise, what supplements to take, how to deal with your doctors, which is all good. But I wanted to pull the camera back and do something on a bigger picture, like what? And so I thought to myself, okay, what if I, to your word principles, if I was really going to share and then teach key principles that anybody could use to craft a great third act, what would they be? And I did a bunch of, I had my 35 years of consulting and coaching work. And then I did a bunch of interviews with people in their 70s and 80s and 90s. And I reflected on my own experience getting into my 70s. And I came up with these three principles and three principles and a thread. That's how I think of it. So I'll summarize those. So the first principle is be the boss of your life.
mm,
Because what happens when you get older, and a lot of this is just the result of ageism, is people try and take your agency away from you. They try and run your life for you. They're like, pat you on the head and don't, no, mom, that's okay. We'll take care of that for you, which means we'll make your decisions for you.
yeah.
Realized that one of the ways to be the boss of your life was something we talked about at the very beginning, to have a clear vision for the kind of older person you want to be and the kind of life you want to have as an older person. Because a lot of times people envision, either consciously or unconsciously, in their work or when they're parents. And then as they get into their 60s, 70s, they kind of stop and just let themselves drift.
Yeah.
It's there's a lot of research that shows, especially if people retire from full-time work, they often just kind of like, well, what do I do now?
Yeah.
So to really get that clarity of vision and then make a plan for fulfilling, how are you, okay, if this is the kind of person you want to be and the kind of life you want to have, how are you going to do that? And then building your crew around you, who are you going to need to help you? So that's what that first part of the book is about. The second principle is master your
Mm,
mindset. And it turns out, and I'm so thrilled to find that this is true. I've always felt like you can manage your internal monologue and you can have a profound impact on your life by doing that. And it turns out that it's even more important as you get old. There's this wonderful study. This is my very favorite statistic in the whole book. There's this wonderful study that was done by the Yale School of Public Health. And it was about a 25-year study. And what they did was they took hundreds, I think about 700 people from 50 to 80, and they asked them a true false questionnaire to determine their mindset. So it was questions like, old people are a burden on society, true or false? So if you think that's true, you have kind of a negative mindset about it.
right.
False, not so much. So they gave them all this, they answered this questionnaire and they just divided them just by that, okay, this group of people has a more positive mindset about aging, this group a more negative mindset. Then they, and they made sure that they were sorting for demographics and pre-existing health conditions and stuff. And then they just followed them for 23 years. And at the end of 23 years, they found that the people who had a more positive mindset about aging lived 7.6 years longer.
I mean, that's a good story. That's a good incentive is probably the better word.
Right? And it turns out that having a positive mindset about aging has a bigger impact on your longevity and even on the quality of your life than quitting smoking, lowering your cholesterol, losing weight, all the stuff that people put so much attention into. And this thing of changing your mindset, which we all can control. We all have control over what we think, right? Has a profound impact. So in that section of the book, I teach people how to manage their internal monologue. And then there's a chapter about mindfulness, which is just being non-judgmentally present, which also has been lots of studies now associated with wonderful outcomes of older people psychologically, physically, emotionally, in terms of longevity. And then the third chapter in that part is about gratitude, having a gratitude practice, which also is strongly, which I'm sure you know, strongly associated with wonderful outcomes. So that whole part of the book is about your mind and how you speak to yourself and how you pay attention to your life. Anybody can do it. It doesn't matter what circumstance you're in or how, it's wonderful. It's absolutely universal. And then the third principle, back to our earlier conversation, is called get good at change. Right. And we've already been talking about this, but younger people tend to think that older people's lives are kind of stagnant and unchanging, like nothing ever happens to those old people, when in fact, the opposite is true. And the changes that happen when you get old are the hardest kind of changes. They're the changes that aren't your idea. You get old.
Yeah. The body doesn't necessarily agree with the mind.
The mind and loved ones die and children away and friendships fray. Change happens and it's difficult. So my bias is that older people, it's even more important that we be good at change, at going through change than younger people. So in the first chapter in that section, I teach the last book I wrote before this was called Change from the Inside Out. It's about how to get good at change with an organizational frame. But the model we have for helping anybody go through a change successfully is absolutely universal and, again, relies on mindset. So there's a chapter where I teach that. And the next chapter I call Modify Gracefully. Because a lot of people, when they get in their 60s and 70s and 80s, like I was just talking to a friend the other day who's 68. And I was talking to her about modifying gracefully. And I was saying, like my co-mother-in-law, the mother of my older daughter's husband, my co-mother-in-law, she used to be a tennis player and now she's in her late 70s and she changed to pickleball. And now she's a pickleball champion in Southern Florida. But it's, I guess, I don't play either one really, but it's much easier on your body. And this other friend of mine who's 68 said, I'm going to play tennis until I die. Well, okay. But, if you're just wrecking your body when you're in your late 70s, really, don't you want to do pickleball or padel or something where you can keep being active but not kill yourself? So that's what that chapter is like. It's about how to recognize when you might need to modify something mentally or physically and how to do it gracefully, how to do it in a way that you're not kicking and screaming kind of.
Yeah.
And then the third chapter in that section is about learning, because one of the fantastic things about being old and not having a 60-hour-a-week job is a lot of people for the first time in their lives have time to learn the stuff that they want to learn, that they're just interested in, versus the stuff you got to learn because you're a parent or for your job or whatever. So in that chapter, I talk about how to select the things you want to learn and then how to go about learning them. And then the very last chapter in the book is called Connection. A thread that runs through everything, because there's, as you may have heard, an epidemic of loneliness in the United States, especially among older people, because, loved ones die, kids move away. This generation of people over 65 are more likely to be childless than any previous generation. So, you're just more likely to be alone, which doesn't necessarily mean you're lonely, but it can. And so I talk about how to go about making friends when you're older, which a lot of people kind of don't know how to do because all their friends are from work or from the parents of their kids or whatever,
Yeah.
So I talk about how to create great connections when you're old.
I love it. And I can see how all of those things would really set you up to be in the right space for really playing it out however you want to.
Yeah.
a couple of things come to mind. You didn't mention sort of the target demographic, I guess, to start this, because as you're going through it, I'm thinking, this isn't work you wait to do until you're 70. This is work you should be doing in your 50s, in your 60s, so that really any age really. But if you're really planning for that next stage, don't wait till you're at that stage to start planning, right? I mean, start doing some of that work now and thinking about it and setting yourself up. Would you agree with that?
Oh, I completely agree. And what I've noticed is different people are very different. Like I have friends who are in their 50s who are like, can't be bothered. I'm head down in my work and my kids are still teenagers. I'm like, fine, whatever, And then I have another friend who's same age as you. She's 56. She says, I want to read this just to get
Yeah.
she's like to think ahead. I want to think ahead. And she also very kindly said to me, and everything that you say about mindset is and getting good at change is age free. I ought to be doing that right now. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Really, a lot of it is universal, right? It's just how do you pull it all together for setting you up for that chapter. But yeah, the other thing that jumped out at me was when we were talking about sometimes the body doesn't agree, sometimes we have to modify gracefully. I mean, all of those things. I started thinking about like, how do you suggest to people juggle the dichotomy of sort of some of the, I'm going to say grief, maybe even disappointment, and some of those there truly are negative emotions, which in themselves aren't bad, that can come in that later life stage because you are either missing your partner or your parents or your children. You don't have your job peers anymore, or your body's not cooperating, so you can't do the things you want to do. All those things, right?
Yeah.
Yet we want to promote the ability to stay happy, to find joy, to be vibrant. That dichotomy to me, for some people, I think is probably harder to juggle than others.
Yeah, in the chapter on mindfulness, I was going to say which is one of my favorite, but I actually like them all. But in the chapter on mindfulness, I give 3 mindfulness exercises for people who haven't done any kind of, and I it's very Western. It's not Buddhist or deep at all, but it's just they're good exercises. And the first one, they get increasingly, challenging. So the first one is just to pick something to look at or something to hear or something to smell, just a thing to focus on and just spend a few minutes just focusing. Because most people, our minds wander all over the place. But also when we observe something, we usually start talking to ourselves about it. What is this? Does that smell good? Does that smell like a thing I smelled last week? And just to learn that discipline of coming back to the present moment is very helpful. So that's the first one, is just focus on a thing, one sense. The second exercise is what's called a walking meditation, where you just walk and just be mindful of walking and of what's around you. And then the third one, which is the most challenging one, and this is to your point, is to do an emotion meditation, to just be mindful of an emotion that you're feeling. And that is very hard for people, especially if the emotion is negative. What we tend to do when we're feeling
anything,
sad, anything, yeah. But especially what we tend to do when we're feeling really sad or anxious, something we think of as negative, we just bury it in all kinds of ways. We eat, or we avoid thinking about it, or we're just really good at doing kind of squid ink on our negative emotions. And so to be able to just sit with it and just feel it, what you find is that it doesn't kill you and that it does its work and then it dissolves. My son, who's a very wise man, when I was almost 20 years ago, I was going through the breakup of my first marriage with his dad. So he was going through stuff too. But I was really angry. And I, as a person, rarely get angry. It's just not an emotion I feel very much. I was so angry and I was kind of scared about it. I didn't know what to do with it. And my son, Ian, who was only 20 at the time, said, Mom, just burn right through it because peace is on the other side. I don't know how he knew that, but it's absolutely true. So I did an anger meditation. I just sat with it and just felt it. And it's hard and it feels awful and it really feels like it's going to hurt you. And then it just breaks up. Like, I'm okay and I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but I feel like people in the old days were better at kind of just going through their emotions because there were so many more terrible things that happened. You had to just go through them and keep going. I mean, people died all the time. Only 1 in 20 people ever got to be 65. So 100, 200, 300 years ago, your kids might die, your spouse might die, your parent, everybody dies. Everybody gets sick. When people get sick 100 years ago, they didn't maybe get well. So you had to be better at just moving through this because otherwise you just wouldn't be able to function, right? So I think kind of lost that capability a little bit. And it's very important because I've had people, my parents both died, my older brother died, you have terrible things happen and you have to integrate them.
Yeah. Terrible things can happen to good people, and you have to find a way to build a life around them. They're never going to go away. It's always happened. You can't erase it. And then you just build your life around them.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And so that I talk about that in that mindfulness chapter because it is true. And there's a little chapter toward the beginning of the book called, before I get into the principles, called "This is a Little Terrifying." Yes, it is. You're gonna die. I mean, and that's what I start out the chapter saying. We're all gonna die. And if you're reading this book and you're 60 or 70 or 80, you're probably gonna die
sooner than later.
And but then I offer a very simple process that I've used and shared with clients and friends and kids and for years about facing your fear. Okay, so you're going to die. What's scary about that? And is there anything in this particular case, you can't do anything to change that, but what can you do to make it less scary?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a tough one for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So in thinking about the chapter where you talk about people having time to, I'm going to say, discover themselves, to find the things they love and to go out and try new things. I think one of the things that I hear often is that it's really hard for people who are mature people, not children, not young teenagers or even college life, to try something new and let themselves be a novice at it, because we've had so many years of being the expert, whether that's an expert at my career or an expert at being a parent or an expert at whatever it is. We have so many years of history at things. We're good at them. Yeah. And now all of a sudden we're saying, hey, open yourself up to suck at something, and maybe you won't, but in a lot of cases you might. And that's okay.
Yes.
But people really have a hard time with that. So what do you say to that?
Oh my God, Marianne, I just could not agree with you more. The book I wrote 2 books ago was called Be Bad First. And it's about how do you learn stuff. And so I brought the main principles from that book into this chapter about learning, because what you're saying is so true. And it's even more, the older we get, the more true it is. Exactly what you're saying. We're used to being experts. We're used to being good at stuff. We don't want to look like novices. We don't want to look bad. We don't want to be bad. So it's a quick tip for your listeners that what I talk about again is self-talk, is how we talk to ourselves. And it turns out that the optimal self-talk, internal monologue for learning when you're doing something brand new is to say to yourself, I'm going to be bad at this for a while.
Set yourself up.
Right? That's inevitable. I'm going to be bad at this for a while, and bet I can get good at it because I've gotten good at a lot of stuff.
Oh, I like that second part.
Right? And that it's a perfect balance. I'm going to be bad at this for a while. Just whew.
Yeah.
And I bet I can get good. I've learned a lot of things. And I'll use myself as an example. So when most of the time, you may or may not know this, most of the time my husband and I live in Spain.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
And so how that happened is when I wrote the Be Bad First book, I decided a big, juicy challenge for me, and I was 65 at the time, was I was going to learn Spanish. Starting at 65. I took it like we all did in 8th grade or something. I knew a little bit, not much. So my husband said, well, maybe we should go vacation someplace where they speak Spanish. That'd be good. And great idea. Thought about Spain. Don't really like the southern touristy part. started doing research. It turns out the north of Spain is very different. It's green and kind of Celtic and just very different than what people think of as Spain. So long story short, we went there, we fell in love, we kept going back, and fast forward, now we have a place there. We have a long stay visa. I'm the oldest, I think, digital nomad in Spain. That's what my visa is.
I love that.
And now I speak, pretty fluent Spanish. After 8 years, I can speak Spanish. And I can't tell you how many times when I was first learning, and then when we first moved there and I had to do things in Spanish, I had to just say to myself, I'm not going to be perfect at this. This is my second language. I'm just learning. And I'm getting better and better, and I can keep getting better and better. And, it's the perfect mindset to just throw yourself into it.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. So, talking about things that you've had to kind of overcome as you've gone into this chapter. So, were there any internal stories that you sort of believed that you personally had to unlearn now that you're trying to embrace your own third act?
Well, there are many. And one of them was, so I've always been very, very work focused. I started my business, Proteus, when I was 38. And, just always never slept much. I always worked a lot. And this was while I was raising two kids. My kids were 2 and 6 when I started the business. So, and I wanted to be there for them. So,
Yeah.
So I say this as a kind of joke, but not really. When I turned 65, which is 8 years ago, I told my partners that I wanted to cut back to full time at work, which was true. I was working like 60 hours a week and I didn't want to anymore. So I cut back when I was 65, I cut back to about 40 hours. And then last year, or maybe a year and a half ago, it was toward the end of 23, I decided that I didn't want to deliver or sell anymore in my business. And then I really wanted to kind of semi-retire. And now I'm only working about 10 hours a week with Proteus. I'm doing another 20 hours a week probably with this book, but I'm working much less than I've ever worked in my life. And that's been a huge shift. And part of it is, I was just writing an article about this. I sleep a lot more than I've ever slept before because now I really appreciate sleep, which I never did before. And I have free time, which is a whole new concept for me. And it took me a year or so to get over feeling guilty about having free time.
Yes.
Because it's been so scheduled,
Yes.
Although that's been my biggest change, I would think.
I love that. And I can relate to that so much in some of the shifts that I've made in my life. And I think that is, though, another spot around taking free time and doing things for ourselves that so many of us struggle with because we feel guilty and we just grew up on these productivity wheels and these, what's the next thing? We got to do the next thing. And it's really, it takes work to sort of unwind that.
Unwind. That's exactly the word I was going to use, Marianne. And one of the culture in Spain helps me a lot because culture is much more balanced. And it's very funny. The word for retirement in Spanish and Castellano is jubilación. That sound like a celebration?
Sure does.
And I have a lot of retired friends in Spain who are like, this is great. Now I get to hang out and learn what I want and travel and talk to my friends and play with my grandchildren. Just awesome. And I feel like, especially in the United States, we have this, it's like, if I retire, I'll be useless.
Yeah.
I won't have an identity anymore. It's like, no, man, you really got to change that.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking that also when you were saying how you really had to shift your own mindset. Again, it comes back to that word mindset, but I do think that this society, I think it's shifting, but the society that we've known for so long, the culture that we've known for so long, really does tie our identity to our job, or I'll say even our role, let's say role in case it's not an external job. But I think that's one of the biggest mind shift challenges that people have to figure out.
1,000%. 1,000%. I just today sent a request from a friend of mine who is in his, he's older than I am. So maybe he's in his mid 70s now. And he's going to finally retire from a big job he has in media. And his boss, who I love and who I've coached, knows that it's going to be hard for him. And she asked me to send him an inscribed copy of the book. And I think for men, often it is harder than for women, that they identify more with their jobs. I mean, even though I will always be the founder of Proteus, but I was the CEO of Proteus for almost 35 years. But I was ready to let go of that. And now I'm on to my next thing. And I think that maybe it's because women have only been having those kind of big jobs for the last, generation or so. But I think men tend to be much more strongly identified with their work selves and have a harder time letting go of it, So I hope that this idea of envisioning that third act and envisioning who you want to be in the third act, I hope that speaks to people who are having a hard time with that shift.
I was going to say that. I mean, I'm not sure. I think I've heard from other people that deal in the retirement, rewirement, the, life after your core job kind of space, that what you said, the same thing, that it's harder for men. I don't have any personal experience with that or have dealt with anybody that really, have seen that difference. What I think I see with folks like you is that who are really successful at it is that they have given it the forethought, that they do have something else to go to. And that might not look like a book deal or another career. That might look totally different. Maybe it's painting on the seashore at some point. I don't know, I'm making it up, obviously, but it could be anything, playing the piano for fun or babysitting the grandkids if that's what you want to do. I don't know. It can be different for everybody.
I completely agree with that. And that's why sometimes people use the word purpose and it's a little too
yes
to some people. My co-mom that I was just talking about, she loves being active. She was a gym teacher. So for her, this whole pickleball thing is great. She has a lot of friends. She settled in Florida, where she grew up in Panama because her dad was in the Army Corps. And a lot of her friends from Panama have also, so she has lifetime friends that she spends a lot of time with, that she's active, she's in book clubs, that's awesome for her. She is loving it. And it's not some big, grand change of the world. She's just doing the things she really enjoys.
I love that.
Her purpose and that help her discover. That's all it is. It's what's going to be joyful and challenging and fun for you.
Yeah. I try to pull that all of the time when people say purpose, because I think people get so hung up. I mean, you could probably listen to half my episodes where I say something about this. Purpose doesn't have to mean world peace, solving world peace or world hunger. That's great. If you can do it, great. Sign me up to give you some applause. But most of us, it's not going to look like that. And that's okay. Just lean into what makes you happy. And inevitably, there will be a ripple effect of some sort in the world if you're doing what you truly love.
And I'll use myself as an example. So, anybody who reads the book will see this. So my vision for myself, and so it sounds a little woo-woo, but it's really meaningful for me, is that I, as a person in my 70s, I want to be elven, like an elf. And by that I mean full of light, deep, strong, and magical.
I love that.
Right? And every day it's like a North Star for me. Am I full of light, deep, strong, and magical? I love it. And my vision for my life is that it's about, my 70s are about exploration. Discover and enjoy and support myself, the world, and those I love. It's just all about exploration. And there's so much lovely stuff in there. And that's enough for me. Those are my stakes in the ground. I remember them almost every day. And I do feel like that I'm having a positive impact on the world,
I absolutely think you are. And what I love about, so I'm going to call it a theme, because every year, and this is a little woo-woo, so probably for the last 6 years or so, I've done a vision board. I never did before. I would have rolled my eyes at it, but and I'm different now. And I do a theme. So the theme is just sort of like what you said, because it gives you that guiding star of, if I do this thing, is it sort of leaning into that theme, so you can kind of just use it as that goalpost. And then also, I just want to pull out what you said about the elven description, because often we remind people that they have to see themselves with great detail. So don't just say, I want to have a fun third chapter. Like, what does that mean?
Yes,
What does
exactly.
that look like to you? And be really, really specific. And I think the more specific you can be, that helps you move towards it.
100% agree. In fact, in the chapter in the book, when I talk about this, I use a process that we've used with organizations and leaders for many years, which we call the time machine process, where you start out and you say, okay, what am I solving for? And is it a fulfilling later life, a quiet later life, a challenge? What am I solving for? Where am I starting from? And then you put yourself in a time machine and you say, okay, it's 5 years from now. I am that person that I want to be. I am having that life I want to have.
Love that.
What does that look and feel like? And then just really note down everything you see and then kind of distill out the key elements, which is how I came to Full of Light, Deep, Strong, and Magical. Those are the things that are most important to me about who I want to be.
I love that. I love it. And for folks that haven't done anything like that before, especially people that have a career, corporate kind of career, or really any kind of career, just think of it like when you're building a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan, and you kind of have this is where I want to get to. And so every time you sort of list those things that can help drive you there, but you can also, when something comes up, use that as a way of making a decision. Does this drive me towards that thing or pull me away from that thing? Right?
1000%. I mean, I've done this kind of vision and strategy process for 35 years with organizations. And when the group that I'm working with and my colleagues now do this, really coalesces around that, as you say, very clear vision. Here are the 3 or 4 or 5 things that are most important to us. It really does become a guidance system. And people can have great conversations then about, does this, just as you said, does this take us toward that or away from it?
Yeah.
Okay, then let's do that.
Yeah.
And just that made personal.
Yes, exactly.
Every so many of the decisions I make now about even how we ended up in Spain, does it really support because my husband has his own vision. Does it really support our vision of the kind of life we want to have? Yes, it does. Okay, great. Let's go.
How do we do it? I love it. I love it. So I'm going to wrap us up and ask you, if you could only leave our listener with one message, what would it be?
It would be that most of this is in your control, that there are things that aren't in your control. Sometimes we have health issues or mobility issues or a loved one dies. All those things are true. But whether or not you're the boss of your life, whether or not you're the master of your mindset, whether or not you get good at change, whether or not you connect with other people, all of those things are in your control. You can use those things to craft a later life that is really meaningful and joyful and fun for you.
Well, I just loved our conversation, and I hope the listener goes out and gets the new old Crafting Your Best Later Life. But I can so relate to the work you're doing, and I love that you're giving us a model of what this can all look like. So thank you for the work you're doing. I do think it's making a ripple out there, and I'm just glad that we got to have this conversation. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Marianne. What a wonderful conversation.
And we will put your links out in the show notes, but where are you most active and where would you like to direct people to?
Probably the best place to go is my website, which is erikaandersen.com.
Okay.
And then second after that, I'd say Erika Andersen 1 on Substack.
And you guys, there's a K in Erika, right? We would just want to point that out. But again, I'll put the links in the episode show notes so that they can easily find you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Message in the Middle. I hope you found something in this conversation that reminded you that you're not alone and that midlife isn't about winding down. It's about waking up. You're not done. You're just becoming. If this episode speaks to you at all, please share it with a friend who needs to hear it. And if you're enjoying the show, I'd be so grateful if you could take a moment to leave a review. It really helps other women find this community and this podcast. Until next time, take care of yourself.